my association with him has brought great fruit. So I'm very appreciative. Okay. Just before I start, I should make the formal appropriate Zoom lecture notice that and give full disclosure that I'm not wearing any trousers or pants. And I'll reveal this at the end of the talk or sometime during the talk. This is just my way to hold your attention for a talk that will be about, well, just over an hour. Okay. Why Sikhi and decolonial thinking? Well, the argument here is that there's a certain necessity for a new vocabulary. Why? Because Sikhi has been transformed into a new form called a religion, Sikhism. And in that transition to a modern context, we're having to narrate ourselves, explain ourselves to an audience that speaks from a certain vantage point and from a certain epistemology. Now, what do I mean by that? We have forgotten that there's been a transition into this new epistemology, what I would call Western narration or modern of modernity. Now, what are the signs of this transition or this transmutation? Is that Gur-Sikhi, pre-colonial Gur-Sikhi, was transformed into Sikhism, like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. Now, in that process, it might seem that it's an innocent translation and that we are a religion, etc. But there's a certain consequences to that translation that we tend to forget the power of. For instance, modern subjectivity argues for a church-state split. So we all know that our tradition is one of Sant Sipahi, the warrior saint, and how politics is divorced from the public sphere. Religion is divorced from the public sphere into the private. And so we can have a religion as long as it's the Sant. We can't have politics, which is the Sipahi. So here's one very important transition into the modern consciousness. And there are many others. For instance, philosophically speaking, we have Western philosophy or the Western narration, this epistemology that I'm talking about, that we exist within, that we try to make communication within, assumes the ground of being to be singular, to be one. From the Abrahamic traditions, one God, and now you have one subjectivity, that's a secular rationality. So whether it's one God or reason, logos, there's a singularity there. Whereas our tradition and other traditions assume the ground of being to be a being with. And this being with the other is a very different starting point. Self-other occur on the same level. It's not a hierarchy of self over other that a singular narration would say. So there's a great consequence to this translation. So therefore, we need to think of a mode of thinking or a grammar that will help us remind us that we have been translated into a new epistemology, this modern epistemology. Epistemology is the way we know something. So the way of knowing how we know ourselves and others is through a Western narration, Western conceptuality. This has been globalized since colonialism. By the 1930s, 89.6% of the globe was converted to European conceptuality, colonized. That's practically the whole globe. So here we have such a massive transformation, not just of a colonization of territories, but and annihilation and genocidal violence that went with it, but epistemicide. Indigenous ways of knowing were displaced and destroyed. So therefore, our notion of existing occurs within a new frame, and the decolonial thinking allows us to see that framing. So this is why the talk is titled Sikhi and Decolonial Thought. Okay, I want to talk about that transition. That's what the talk is about. And I want to say we can think about what we have forgotten by the employment of a decolonial thinking. Decolonial thought helps us remind ourselves of what we have lost, what we have forgotten. Now, I want to start first with the example of the individual self. Why? Because it is rarely done, the starting point of how this affects the individual. What is a human being? Well, let's just keep it simple. A human being, let's say, is a language being, a being that has culture, that speaks. Now, human beings, unlike animals, don't live on the earth. What I mean by that is that human beings live in a world, a psychological projection, a narration, a culture, a mindset. So there's a difference between world and earth. The primary difference is that the world that human beings project and live in is narrative. It's invented. Whereas the earth is not a narrative and it's not invented by human beings. Now, there's a certain Israeli-American scholar, Daniel Kahneman, who brings forth, writes a book, a best-selling book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And he talks about the self as being composed of two selves. The first self is the body, what he calls the experiencing self. And then the other self is the remembering self. Now, this difference is crucial, and the talk will be structured by this, these two selves. What is the key difference between the two selves? Well, the remembering self is language, culture, and based on memories, stories. It's a narrative self. It's how we make sense to ourselves through symbolic symbols. But that is a secondary self. Whereas the first self, the body self, the experiencing self, is not languaged. It's affective. And it is very interesting because the key difference between the two is time. Now, time in Indian philosophy, Kaur, is also death. And we realize that the body, the experiencing self, is constantly experiencing and is constantly attuned to its environment, changing, whether it's cold and hot, old cells are dying, new cells are being born. It's constantly acting, it's constantly in motion. It's an experiencing self in that way, but we interpret that experience. We move from the earth body into the mind world, and we make a story about it. That's the remembering self. Now, through his study, he realized that there's a key difference that we need to understand. They're unrelated. The remembering self has very poor correlation with the experiencing self. The mind has a very poor correlation with the body. The mind, the remembering self, has many choices. It chooses which memories, which stories, which narratives to talk about itself, and it it makes a movement between what's right and wrong, which stories to remember, as though those are what is the truth. Whereas the experiencing self, there's no choice, there's no language, there's an automatic, natural, organic response. And he says that what we need to do, rather than think about where to find the truth in terms of a narrative, is to reconnect the mind with the body, reconnect the remembering self with the experiencing self. Now that becomes very important, because that's a key challenge to what I understand is the modern episteme. The modern episteme, the modern way of understanding and knowing, is about knowledge. Modernity is about knowledge. I want to argue that we have been converted to modernity through the colonial encounter. Okay. So now that we see that there is the importance of narration, Western narration, is the stories of the remembering self, where we live, the projected world, but it's at the cost of forgetting the body, forgetting the earth that we live on. We live in abstractions, symbols and names, but we forget the affective feelings that connect us to basic bodily desires, right? Food, shelter, health, etc. So this is an important point to understand, that we've been converted to a narrative. Okay, so I will use this binary, these two notions of cells, throughout the talk. So what are the characteristics? What can I point to that we have been converted to modernity? Well, the Western episteme, the Western narration, assumes certain key categories as essential. Race, racialization, history, historicization, which displaces myth, or terms other stories as myth rather than the way the West understands history and making chronicles. Race, history, reason, and rationalization, which displaces faith-based understanding or emotion. And the most important one is, and the one that's often forgotten, is religion and religionization. And many scholars now have understood that this is a force. There's been many published works on this, and often racialization and religionization go hand in hand. Now, all of these are narratives. They're narrations at the expense of bodies, at the expense of earth. So here we have what Kahneman talked about occurring on an individual scale, occurring on a global mass social scale. That a Western epistemology transformed our way of thinking about ourselves by suppressing the body and expressing the mind, narrative structures. Another way to understand modernity is to think about what Bruce Gregory Smith taught, the structure of this epistemology. What does this epistemology do? It vaunts theory over praxis. That's one way to understand modernity. Modernity is the ability to think before you act, rationally, logic, organize, order, name, classify, right? So this notion of thinking theory before acting is the core of what this conversion involves, this conversion to modernity. This has consequences. For example, the knowledge that arises by having knowledge over affective feelings, like embodied knowledge, doesn't relate to, say, how you learn how to ride a bike or play a guitar or sing kirtan. So they're embodied knowledges. They're not thinking systems. A wrestler or a martial artist has to get out of his head. So we do have embodied practices that show us the limit of the knowledge that organizes Western modernity. And those are very important to remember. And in those traditions, in those practices, whether it's riding a bike or a guitar, or music, or singing, or martial arts, we get a clue as to what is lost by only living in a thinking system, only existing in representations. So this is another characteristic of modernity, that we shift from the colonial encounter with difference with the other, which requires the difficulty of translation, and to the ease of simply naming, classifying, representing. So here I want to talk about that shift, the shift from translation to interpretation, from encounter to representation. Now, Edward Said talked about this as imperialism that has monopolized the entire system of representation. Colonialism has monopolized, Western narration has monopolized the whole way of understanding ourselves, not just individually, how each culture has to understand themselves. And this is what forms the epistemology of modernity that I'm trying to highlight. So this is what I call a conversion. We're moving from our bodies and existing in narrative, in reasonable narrative, in logical narrative. In other words, towards calculative reason, instrumental reason. Now, this is a force which has become socialized as a norm. Now, an artist doesn't exist like that. A martial artist certainly doesn't exist like that. So there's a consequence to this that I'm trying to point out. There's a certain deception at play, a certain deception. And the brilliant French Jesuit priest and scholar Michel de Certeau captures it well in this quote. He says, the operation in question is rather sly. The discourse gives itself credibility in the name of the reality which it is supposed to represent. But this authorized appearance of the real serves precisely to camouflage the practice which in fact determines it. Representation thus disguises the praxis that organizes it. So there's a living practice that is going on, the living of your body, and we simply name it as, oh, riding a bike, going to a lecture, listening to music. And that naming, that representation pretends to be total. And we forget that it isn't total, and we actually believe, oh, I'm riding a bike, I'm going to a lecture, I'm listening to some music. We exist in the narration. We exist in the remembering self at the expense of the experiencing self, such that when we're riding a bike, we could easily crash it because we forget that we're actually moving and we're trying to do our phone or driving a car and looking at our phone. We're existing in a narration. Every martial artist or sports person will know that that's the great problem, to get out of your mind and get back into your body, to the organic, fast mode, rather than the slow mode of thinking and representation, right? To have sahaj, to have spontaneity, to have flow. That's what every sports person realizes is required for optimal engagement. But we're entering a slow mode and assuming that that's the only thing that exists. That's one of the major consequences. So there's a deception going on there, as de Certeau talks about it, as a sly operation. Representation thus disguises the praxis that organizes it. Okay. Therefore, the title of this talk should really be Gur-Sikhi and Decolonial Praxis. But the reason why we agreed on the title as Sikhi and Decolonial Thought or Decolonial Thinking is precisely to show the seductive nature of the Western narration that we're all involved with, that we get captured by, as though what we need is a new thinking, a different thinking, rather than a decolonial praxis. So I think you look at the title, Sikh or Sikhi is a named particularity, whereas Gur-Sikhi is a universal in which all beings can relate to. All beings have to contact the Guru, Satguru. That's a universal. It's not just to do with Sikhs. Muslims have to do it. Atheists have to. Everybody has to contact the Satguru. Everybody has to contact their body, at least, right? And then decolonial thought, again, a particularity rather than a decolonial praxis in which it can change beyond itself, change form, what's required now. So I want us to remember that what we are talking about when we say Sikhi and decolonial thought is actually a praxis. And the way I want you to think about that is the difference between a philosophical view and let's say a marga, a way, the middle way, the Sikh way, Gur-Sikh way, Gur-Sikh marga, a sadhana. There's a huge difference between the two, right? A view, you could say that's the remembering self, is final. It classifies as you're a man and you behave this way, and you're an American and you behave this way. It's like a list of things that you must do to be a part of that label. That's what we've got caught by. That's what a view is. And you have correct views. So you have the red version and you have the blue version, right? And they fight each other about which one's right and which one's wrong. Whereas a way is not particular. It's particular to the being that engages in it, but it changes and keeps changing. And so the way can be different to itself and cannot be named down, cannot enter into narration as a totality or a completion. It has to be open-ended. That's what religious traditions are. They're ways, but they have been converted into views, philosophical systems. Sikhism is a view. Religions, monotheism, one God, etc. But that's what we can trip off the top of our tongue, right? Whereas Gur-Sikhi, Nam Marga, like we can't talk about that. That's hard to narrate, hard to capture. The best way to be a wrestler, that's hard to capture. The best way to be a martial artist is hard to capture. It's a doing. So this is one of the key consequences of entering modernity. We are being converted from our experiencing self of the body into the remembering self, the thinking self of the mind, of culture, of language, of race, etc. That's very important because all of us forget this. And I'm arguing that decolonial praxis can help us, remind us that we got caught by a certain vocabulary. We've got caught by a certain grammar of power, the vectors of race, reason, religion, history, rationality. That's what orders our being. Okay, now I want to use an example of rats in a cage. You may have heard about this experiment. So there's a rat in a cage and it gets an electric shock every now and again, totally randomly. And it is deeply disturbed, as we all would be from an electric shock. But then eventually it gets used to and carries on with its business. No matter how many times you do this, you give this electric shock, it eventually just carries on by its business. It lives in a cage in which that phenomenon occurs and it can handle it. But put another cage by it with another rat inside, and now you do the same experiment. Whereas before the rat was normalized to the electric shock, now it starts to blame the other rat immediately and starts to get angry about that. And the other rat is also randomly shocked, and it starts to react as the other rat caused it. So now you have a very interesting phenomenon occurring in which neither of them are willing to accommodate electric shocks, and it wants to destroy the other one. That's a very interesting experiment. And the key point that I want you to think about in regards to that experiment is divide and rule. That there's an invisible mechanics at work in which various populations are pitted against each other. And the British knew about this. Well, power, anybody in power knows about this, how to manipulate various populations to start to blame each other for the problems that actually have nothing to do with the other rat, the other people, the other group. I want to just elaborate this a little bit and talk about two forms of violence. Now, there's the subjective sudden violence, like an electric shock. And then there's the objective slow violence. So let's talk about those two. Subjective sudden violence is spectacular, it's direct, it's event-based, it's agent-driven, it's communal, if you like, it's extremist, it's visible, you can see it. Whereas slow objective violence is indirect, is invisible, is impersonal and incremental. I want to argue that power, whoever's in power, employs these two forms of violence, especially the invisible form of slow violence, to create this conversion into a modern consciousness, modern subjectivity. The latter one, slow objective violence, has two major forms: sudden subjective violence, then slow objective violence. That latter one has two forms, and the two forms are to do with a grammar, a symbolic grammar, a language, a way of structure, classification of various groups and individuals of life. It's the way life is ordered. And then the second part is that grammar creates certain assumptions that everybody accepts as a society. The other one is not symbolic, but systemic, and is located within the forces of economic, political, and juridical institutions. And they create and shape forms, laws, etc. So you can see that this picture is quite complicated, but I want you to think about how all the media simply gives you the subjective violence of the terrorists, which is immediate, direct, and visible. 9/11, the planes crashing into the Twin Towers, except for Tower 7, which also falls in the same manner, but we'll forget that. Now, the Commission didn't even look at that tower. But that's where the attention is. And this is like the electric shocks. So suddenly we start to blame Muslims. And we all know that the first person killed as a revenge attacks on Muslims was a Sikh, Balbinder Singh Bhogal, right? And so often it is the case that sudden subjective violence, the terrorist amongst us that creates these bombs or suicide bombs or whatever, that disguises the incremental, invisible, slow violence of intelligence operations, false flag operations, black operations, whatever you want to call them. So whether it's 9/11 or 1984 or COVID-19, the story isn't as simple as we think it is. Many would argue that they were employed false flags, that they were black operations. Whether they were or not isn't necessary to understand the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is that we're being deceived by a certain narrative that is projected through the media. We're being deceived by a certain narrative that shifts us from our body into our mind. We're captured by a narrative, a story, a rationale, an argument. And we argue, like Kahneman found out, between those interpretations rather than have the ability to transcend the narrative and reconnect with our bodies. Now, is there any example of this that the British did in terms of divide and rule? We always hear about this. Well, Lord Birkenhead, I'm always rather amused by the British effusive nomenclature, Lord Birkenhead, who was the British Secretary of State of India in 1925, March 1925, he wrote this: "The split between the Congress and the independents is a new and promising and unexpected development. I hope that it will grow. I have always placed my highest and most permanent hopes upon the eternity of the communal situation. The greater the political progress made by the Hindus, the greater, in my judgment, will the Muslim distrust and antagonism become." Playing the Hindu community against the Muslim community. The electric shocks that are invisible, incremental, that are supplied during colonialism, that converted us into a narrative in which there's always friend and enemy. Now that's not Gur-Sikhi. Sikhi has a different starting point than friend and enemy. It has the notion of friend. There's a completely different notion of sovereignty at play there, completely different notion of the way we can relate to otherness. Friend-enemy is a hierarchy of power, master-slave. Friend-friend is an equal relation. A relation where equality can occur. So that's another consequence of this translation. Okay, so now you've understood that we have shifted from the power of being confronted with the other, the encounter, which requires the difficulty of translating through languages and signs, to simply names, representation. Modernity is a force of representation. It represents you in a way that makes sense to itself. Now this, living only within the mind, living only within this narration, I argue that this conversion causes nihilism. How? I argue that nihilism has a hidden relation to idolatry. Both live within only that which can be named, and therefore are inevitably shallow and lack depth, lack meaning. What creates nihilism is the separation of philosophy from poetry, if you like. Poetry does not betray the original difficulty of life as unnameable with what philosophy names. One philosopher, Caputo, said that his way of interpreting is to stick with the original difficulty of life and not betray it with metaphysics. Gur-Sikhi martial arts, etc., wants you to stick with the original difficulty of embodied being and not to betray that by titles, names, logics, stereotypes. And doing so, simply believing, oh, this is a man, this is a woman, this is a Sikh, this is a Muslim, this is a Hindu, this is a religion, this is a race, these are savages, these are barbarians, and these are civilized. That's the master-slave dialectic, civilized and barbaric, which continues into the present in many forms until you get developed, underdeveloped. Right. So if you simply stick with the naming, the narrative, there is a horrendous and humongous error of thinking that I am right, as though the truth could be expressed in a singular way and one's narrative can provide all the answers. This is obviously ridiculous to an extent that causes nihilism. And we realize that nihilism, that this way of living, just in the name, just in the remembering self, involves a rejection of life itself and its infinite complexity and organic intelligence. It is the rejection of the body in favor of the mind. It is the experiencing self being suppressed by the remembering self, and the rejection of the silence by speech. Now, the rejection of the silence is very important, the silence of the body. The silence of the body is temporal. It involves time. And that involving time has a crucial relationship with narrative. It upsets any narrative that tries to name it. The next day upsets any way of your understanding of what's going on. Events happen and we're all struggling to figure out what is actually going on. Now that silence is important because in another paper called The Animal Sublime that I've written, the body contains the silence of the animal and the mystic. And that silence, so therefore returning to the body is an absolute treasure for Sikhs. The Sikhs call the body an absolute treasure because it contains the silence of the animal and the mystic. And that silence is what is being forsaken as we enter modernity, modern consciousness. There's no such thing as religion, mysticism, union with God. This is all fantasy. There's no returning to the animal state. We live as linguistic beings. So there's a certain huge consequence to Sikhism and living only with Sikhism rather than Gur-Sikhi. Another way to understand what this nihilism is that it involves a splitting of allegory from satire. Allegory is to convert the strange into the familiar, and satire is to take what is always assumed to be familiar and return it back to the strange. So there's a very important tension there between allegory and satire, between people that stand up and tell the truth and then memes that are made of them, right? So comedy here has a very powerful political operation, because that might be the only way that we can say things that have political impact, that other ways make you lose your job. So that relationship between allegory and satire, one could say that the conversion to modernity is to just go with allegory, our story. This is what happens. It's called history, rather than connect it constantly with satire. When the Buddha finally realized nirvana, he saw that it was vast, immense transformation with such subtlety that he wondered how he could communicate what his whole being had gone through to another human being. And when he first tried to teach another human being what had happened, you know what that person did? Listened carefully, and then that person laughed and said, would that be so? Would that be so? So here we have a very important notion of the weakness of narratives, not just the immense power of them. People can reject your story, your version, your interpretation, and they can be polarized in such a way that there's no ground between them. And isn't that what we see today? But who is behind that, controlling it? That's another question that we should think about. So nihilism occurs when the world, which is a living, is divorced from the earth, which is the life that gives birth to various modes of living ways, right? So there's that world-earth binary that I am working with. And we all know that a singular story that pretends to explain all doesn't exist. There isn't such a story. Yet science pretends to be that. But science cannot do away with poetry, laughter, ritual, dance, music. There is the power of embodied being. Now Derrida talks, well, Grun expounds upon this. I think it's important to elaborate this a little bit. So allegory, Gerald Bruns talks about it as philosophy's way of overcoming its suspicion of whatever is not itself. Okay, these Sikhs are strange. We'll convert them, overcome the challenge of the poetic, musical Sikh, and convert them into an abstract religion that speaks logically. Monotheism, morality, modernity, right? So philosophy is a way of keeping itself pure, and there is no discourse of purity that isn't without violence. Allegory is a appropriative discourse with the implicit claims to universality. We start to universalize this story so that we all believe that democracy, liberalism, secular rationality is the truth or the highest truth. It's been universalized. All interpretation is certainly allegorical in the sense of being a conversion of the strange into the familiar. Satire, on the other hand, satire is the discourse of the other against the same. It's the Sikh speaking back to the Western powers. It's counter-allegory. Satire explodes the conceptual schemes or mechanical operations of the spirit by which we try to objectify and control things, including all that comes down to us from the past. Satire is unconvertible, uncontainable, and uncontrollable. Isn't that what the body is? Isn't that what the experiencing self is? No matter how much philosophy of gym fitness we want and good health, our body becomes sick. It ages, and we can't do what we used to be able to do. This is uncontrollable, uncontainable, and unconvertible, no matter how much we wish to be of this kind of image or this kind of person. So there is a real wisdom in relating to time, in relating to death, into relating to our body, which is being denied by the search for the right philosophy, the right narrative, the right structure, the right argument. So Derrida talks about laughter, and he says, laughter alone exceeds dialectics. It bursts out only on the basis of an absolute renunciation of meaning, an absolute risking of death. The burst of laughter is the almost nothing into which meaning sinks absolutely. Philosophy, which is work, can do or say nothing about this laughter, for it should have considered it first. In the system, Hegel's philosophy, poetry, laughter, ecstasy are nothing. Hegel hastily gets rid of them. He knows no other aim than knowledge. And Hegel is a major foundation of modernity. No other thing but knowledge. And he gets rid of the body, the poetry, the laughter, and ecstasy. What's the beginning of Anand Sahib? Anand Pya Meri Mai Satguru Me Paye. Should have considered laughter, ecstasy, poetry first. Anand first. That's where the gurus begin. They don't begin with a mental system, a project, a philosophy. They begin with the transformed body, from manmukh to gurmukh, and the ecstasy that that's involved with, the transformation of that, the bliss of that. Therefore, we need to have this connecting of mind and body, not an argument to represent Sikhi as something. That needs to be done. There needs to be work there. We need to have language. We need to argue. We need to have representations. But we cannot have representations that get divorced from the experience of being in time and the transformations that's possible that reside within the body. I am ecstasy. Oh, my mother, I have found the true guru. I am in ecstasy. This is what's denied. Freud says you can't crawl back into the womb. You can't have the bliss of that moment again. Religion is a false ideology, a false consciousness. Marx, many. So modernity, key figures of modernity argue that argue for this dismissal of the potentiality of the body. Kahneman, talking about experiencing self and the remembering self, is saying the same thing. We've forgotten that there's no relation between these two, and that is an issue. It's unavoidable, this issue, right? Okay. So therefore, the ego is formed by organizing all possible interpretations to conform to one very specific interpretive mode that is employed in most, if not all, situations. What is that? It's naively trying to always have pleasure over pain. We're all instrumentalists. We all do things that benefit us rather than things that challenge us. And the gurus say, people beg for pleasure, but they get pain instead. And it is so rare to meet somebody that puts pain before pleasure. That person puts their body before the projection of pleasure, that this gives me pleasure, I want to have this, existing in a mind map. So I think these connections now you can start to see operating, how the issue of representation is not just about colonialism, it's about being human. And the critique that the Sikhs have is not just about colonialism, it's about being human. It goes beyond that. It's any narration, not just Western narration. The importance of Western narration is at the public level, societal level, institutional level that structures our lives, which denies our contact to the experiencing self. Okay, so the reason why we need to engage with decolonial praxis and thinking is that it provides an intervention that causes an interruption in the smooth unfolding of the West story that we've all got trapped in. Decoloniality, decolonial practice may be able to begin to tell a different story, but not only that, it brings to fore modes of being that have been silenced by Western narration. So therefore, there's an ethical necessity for a new conceptual grammar within the university structure. One of the key, so I want to just go through a number of examples of decolonial thinking. Now, so we're not totally against narrative, but we can, like philosophy, Nietzsche is he promotes a non-philosophy, a system-breaking philosophy. That's the mode that we're talking about, how poetry uses language and concepts and grammar to challenge philosophy, how satire uses language and concepts and grammar to challenge the mainstream allegory that's in play. So, but we have to have a nuanced relationship to this conceptual vocabulary. So the decolonial thinking has talked about something called the historical colonial difference. Now, what is that? So basically, even before colonial times, you'd have Europe with in the 13th century, you have a mappa mundi. We have a map with Christ at the center and concentric circles going out beyond Christendom. So you got normal human beings in the center, to eventually you get deformed human beings, until eventually you get notions of monster races or cynocephaly, dog-headed beings that exist in India, etc., and Africa. So here you have a notion of othering that is spatial. And that othering that is spatial, simply just far away from our center, it's on the periphery. We don't know it, and so we imagine it to be monstrous. That operated in colonial times, and what we call the other in those contexts during the 16th and 17th century was infidels. They just don't know the truth of Christ or whoever. So this spatial othering gets transformed by the mid-1800s, because of Darwin, to a temporal othering. So in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, what was initially othered as infidels now becomes named as primitives, underdeveloped in the 20th century. So we're backward in time. We're out of time, right? That's quite interesting. So think about othering in terms of both dynamics of spatial and temporal forces. That's the force of this representation. And this replaces the difficulty of translation, this interpretation that easily names the other as spatially othered or temporally othered, as a monster, as an infidel, or as the primitive, or as undeveloped, or as backward. In other words, the civilized barbaric is in operation. That's the dialectic that we're talking about. Now, they argue that these monsters, these underdeveloped, these primitives are naturally so. They're naturally that way, rather than as a consequence of the devastating violence of colonization, that they were bombed back to cavemanhood, right? Their infrastructure is bombed. So the historical colonial difference is a way to challenge the Western narration that, there's inequality as a natural. They're not really humans, they're subhumans. They're just naturally that way. They're tribal beings that don't know much. They're not civilized beings that have historical consciousness and the ability to reason and have logic and arguments. As though they don't have reason. They have reason. It's just a different kind of reason. And reason plays a different kind of value in their tradition. One culture values reason as the top, another culture values it as important, but not the top. Gur-Sikhi, for example, right? It's not that they're irrational, reason is operating. So another notion that the decolonial thinking uses is the notion of enunciation rather than representation, that we have to move from Western representations to enunciate our own values. Now that's much harder than is said. So he says, Walter Minola talks about this and says that constructing different loci of enunciation is at stake, rather than the diversity or accuracy of representations. So we shouldn't be arguing about, oh, this is a misrepresentation of Sikhi. Nobody will listen to us. Nobody listens to our corrections at all, hardly, minimally. Through long, arduous processes, we might be heard a little bit into a law, but then the law is ignored and we're still attacked as either Santa Claus or Osama bin Laden, right? So this is an issue that we have to confront. Now, how do we get to have our voice gain enunciative power? That's the question. How do we allow a proliferation of different centers of enunciation so that all oppressed groups can get the voice that has public power? That's the issue, not correct representation. So there's something on the table there to think about what to do there. Now, the last one, the last concept that I'll talk about is interiority and exteriority. Now, Darwin and others saw the religious infidel or the non-rational primitive as belonging outside of European modernity. But like tradition, they do not exist outside modernity, but within its exteriority. In other words, what Minola is clarifying is that this is because we are constructed precisely by the rhetoric of modernity as an outside. He continues, the outside of modernity is precisely that which has to be conquered, colonized, superseded, and converted to the principles of progress and modernity. Sikhism is that exteriority. Sikhism is not outside of modernity. Sikhism is the religion, is the name in which European power gets to understand us. So we are seen through the lens of their notion of exterior, outside, because they do not want to actually go outside. They want to convert the outside. So this interiority, exteriority is a very good vocabulary and conceptual structure to realize that we exist in the system of Western narration as a difference, but as a difference that makes no difference. Not really a difference. We're not really the outside. Gur-Sikhi, Nam Marga are outside of Western conceptuality. But the only way we can exist inside it, that they will allow, is as Sikhism, as a religion in which we have transformed the socio-political mysticism that is Gur-Sikhi into a private system of feeling, right? So that's what it means to have a notion of exterior. So we can challenge that. Knowing this concept, we can challenge their ways of naming us as different to themselves and say, that's not really different. This is just Christian. You're just talking about Christianity. Okay. Now, I realize that we perhaps need to bring this to a close and open some time for question time. So I'm going to jump to the conclusion and just take another 2 minutes to finish up here. So the necessity to ask not just questions of power, not just to hold power accountable, but to ask counter-hegemonic questions outside the box of Western narration. Then we can form diverse counter-publics. Speaking truth to power is not about correct representations, therefore, but transforming socio-political space so that diverse enunciations can be heard as equally authoritative. That's a different project than simply saying, that's a misrepresentation, mischaracterization of this. Here's a representation you should use. That's not the issue. They've already predicted that. But there are problems with, so in other words, we shouldn't get caught by cultural difference and ignore colonial difference. Cultural difference simply asks for relativism. Colonial difference asks for justice, liberation from epistemic imperial powers. Right? That's a very different project. But there are problems with decolonial thinking that I can see. Two ones that I'll outline here, and that is, it needs to be a praxis. It needs to be organic, so that praxis leads theory. It changes. It's not a system of thought. It's an embodied practice of liberating oneself, right? So that's important. The second one is probably more controversial, and is decoloniality is too closely aligned with and actually subsumed by a notion of indigeneity. But I want to argue that there is no land, no language, no culture, no ethnos, no nation that can secure a pure origin. Wherein truth becomes transparent and something that can be captured and owned. I don't think that's possible. Can there be such a thing as First Nations? Are such imaginings more fiction than fact? Isn't it merely a matter of where you draw the line of a temporal horizon? Of course, I'm aligned with First Nation Indigenous peoples here. I'm aligned with them because they've suffered the same kind of, similar kind of oppressions that I have. But I don't want to turn myself into an origin that's pure, an indigenous notion that I have a sacredness that cannot be challenged. Every narrative can be challenged. So Gur-Sikhi shouldn't be turned into an indigeneity so that it becomes one language, one land, one people, which is the exact violence that modern Western narration involves. So there's a certain issue there. We need to just unpack that slightly because it's a complicated issue. In other words, what I'm arguing is that there's no such thing as a language. There is only language that has expression through particular forms. All human beings communicate. So language is what's happening. All human beings have languages. But that's called language in a universal sense, I would argue. But there's no such thing as a particular language. You can't just have French as though it's divorced from other Romance languages. You can't just have German or English. That doesn't make sense. So there's an interrelation there that's being forgotten. And that's what I'm thinking indigeneity gets locked into. It gets locked into a simple narrative of language, land, people, etc., rather than human being. There's no such thing as French person or a German person. There are those kinds of expressions, but they're not unique forms of human being. They're just another form of human being. Human being has a diversity of expression. And we mustn't forget that. And that's what Gur-Sikhi has always been about. That's why it could have its relationships with others so easily and include Brahmins as well as Shudras, and include the non-Sikh, Sufis as well as Sikhs. This is very, very important. It's a different model of modernity. So what comes with Gur-Sikhi is not just a new narrative, but a notion of a new human being, Gurmukh. This is in advance of the enlightened version of a new European notion of a human being, which has reason as its highest value. We have a new notion of a human being in Sikhi, and therefore a new notion of community, Sat Sangat. Now that is really important that we perhaps need to elaborate. I don't have time to do it now, but I'll conclude with this. There needs to therefore be bringing narration back to the body, bringing the mind and body together. And that is what's said in the Japji? Gurmukh Nadan, Gurmukh Vedan, Gurmukh Reha Samai. First, the body of ecstasy. The body of ecstasy. Second, the mind, right? First, Gurmukh Nadan, the musicality, the tone, the nad, anhat nad, right? Then Gurmukh Vedan, the knowledge. But the key thing is allegory and satire brought together. Philosophy and poetry brought together in a tension that is what is required for creation, for creativity, a creative being, Gurmukh Reha Samai, the integration of those two. Okay, I'll end there. I think,
Bhogal,
yeah. Okay.
It was such a meditative talk. So every time I listen to you, it has a very deep, profound effect on my whole being. So although you speak in English, what we call the language of the colonizer, however, you have developed such a style that you articulate things in a way that have a very calming, profound effect on one's mind. So thank you very much. Yeah, it was a great talk.
Ask all speakers to basically shout, because I haven't sorted out the volume on this and I can just hear you. So if you can shout, I mean, I suppose that's just for me.
Maybe
painful for others.
Okay, so let us see. Maybe the problem is only with my computer.
No, it was Jujar when Jujar spoke as well.
Your voice is fine.
So I will invite Prabhsharan Deep to speak. Let's see if he is okay, if his voice is coming through.
It was a great talk, Professor Sahib. Thank you so much accepting the invitation at such a short notice. And I think we made the right decision for inaugurating the institute with this kind of talk. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Any echo? Is there any echo in the sound?
No, there is no echo.
So we should open it up for the discussion. We had some profound comments by Karnbir Singh, and we have Apple Kaur, and Sarbir Singh, Jujar Singh. So who would like to go first?
I'll go.
Okay.
Please shout.
Professor Bhogal, you mentioned a very interesting diagram, which I came across myself one time. It was something like Jesus at the center in concentric circles. Do you know the origins of that diagram? And can you talk a little more about that? Because what happened is, I'll share with you a brief anecdote. I'm at a coffee shop. I'm stressing because I got like something to do for work the next day. It's like a Sunday, and I'm busy working. I'm like kind of going like this, and I see a Christian Asian group like across the coffee shop from me, and they're talking about their stuff. And one of them gets up and hands me a little thing on a napkin, basically a pencil drawn diagram with circle. It looks like a target, and on it, on the side, it comes with commentary with something like, "Are you trying to look for the truth? Do you feel like you're going in circles? Don't worry, one day you will find the truth in the center. The Father will come save you," or something like that. So, and you mentioned that diagram today, so I'm very interested. Do you know more about that? Do you have some books about that? What's going on with that diagram?
Yeah, there's a number of books that's written on the monster races that you can find that map in. I can send you the sources.
Sure.
But what is interesting is, with the conversation that you had with the person, is that you're trying to find your center. I would argue that there's a violence to the notion of a singular center, and what we should talk about rather than center is the notion of source, that we all share the same source, but we cannot name it our center. And this is what Guru Nanak does. He doesn't say convert to Sikhism because Sikhism is the center, right? He says go to the source. So I think there's an interesting shift that needs to occur with the Western narration of always saying that we found the center. We found the center of the universe. You know, they'll say this is the truth. And basically it's just one interpretation and it's at the expense of everybody else's.
Right.
Whereas Guru Nanak and the Guru Granth Sahib, the majesty of it is that it has plural narratives cohering in resonance.
Yeah. I also think
that's an achievement yet to be seen in modern Western modernity.
The concentric circles also seem something like Underhill was talking about in her mysticism, where something like emanations, the concept of emanations has been around for a very long time, since before Plato, perhaps, where there's a truth. And then, you know, by the time you get to the earth and this domain, you're very far away from that to truth, and the truth is out there somewhere. And, you know, we could potentially get to it, but it's very far away. And, you know, that sort of narrative is different from the immanence narrative that everything is within. And so I've started studying from her. It's pretty interesting, but it seemed like the concentric circles with people outwards had something to do with how these guys have been thinking since Plato onwards.
Yeah. Again, the atrophy of imagination that is involved by entering modernity is precisely the loss of the fantastic beings, the unknown, beings otherwise than we can imagine. Because what's happened in the entering into modern scientific technological world is that the human being has been reduced to their bodies in the physical sense. And that's only our focus. But if we're in mental beings, if we're imagining beings as well, then we live in cosmographies of great imagination. Look at the Buddhist cosmography with 31 dimensions of existence. Look at any kind of cosmography in the past. It so much informs the way you be a human being, rather than simply, oh, I am a body, I have to keep fit. Health is just physical. So, and as though it's not a metaphor, and it's not as though our narration of the body is not also a fiction. It's also an imagination. It's also an interpretation. It's just based on visible, measurable data, but it's an interpretation. So we often get stuck with the notion that truth must be visible. Truth isn't visible. That's the starting point of anybody who's seriously looking.
Anji, Karanbir Singh. Karanbir Singh.
Thank you.
I please beg for you to shout. I can't hear you.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
I don't know what the hell. Everything's on max volume. I've got everything on max volume, and I just don't know what to do.
Anyway, better than before. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
You're very quiet, so if you shout.
I will try my best. Sorry. Okay, I'll have my microphone in front of me. Thank you. My question is with regards to, in context of Sikhism, please let me know, is democracy a byproduct of colonial narrative?
Say it again,
Reason.
please.
Is democracy a byproduct of a colonial narrative? Reason why I'm asking this question, because when I read the history of Shah Muhammad, the people who were equals when it comes to the aggressor, that was an East India Company, and their thought processes says जमहूरियत एक ऐसा कायदा हुकूमत है जिसमें सरगिने तो जाते हैं तोले नहीं, where you can count the heads but you cannot measure the content of the character. And the second part is the reason. And but we, in a Sikh, as a Sikh, what we believe in, sometimes the truth is not, you cannot rationalize the truth. Why? After Vadaka Lukara, 1762, a rational being would think that we have lost so many lives. We've been butchered all away. So at that point of time, Sikhism says, we're going to take over the Ahmad Shah Abdali in next 2 or 3 months. And we did that. So please let me know when we lost our empire, whether we as a Sikhs agreeing to come into the politics or the democracy or the Jamhuriyat, would that be having any kind of a resonance or any kind of a linkage to what the Sikhism was? Because we are already coming into a system that is already set up. We are coming into a democracy, and then we know that democracies, the last stage of the democracy where it goes is universal equality. And we have an example for that as well. When Kasab was murdered, he was hanged till death for whatever the crimes he committed. And that was really, really bad crimes that he committed, act of terrorism. The courts, the Supreme Court, they said that in a view or to look at the majority sentiments, this is that he should be hanged till death. So if we are the minor of the minorities, wouldn't we think that using a term democracy would never, ever go in our favor in terms of what is right or what is not right, or what is rightly done, or what are right things to be done? Thank you.
I kept trying to say to put your mic nearer to your lips. So I got some of that. So let me try and respond. And if I totally misheard, please correct me, but have the mic right next to your lips, because I could hear it when you did that. Okay, so let me see if I got somebody. So you're talking about the ideal of democracy, and I think you were challenging it by various Sikh narratives, or seeing how Sikhi goes beyond democracy. Is that right? Okay, so that's what I thought I heard. I couldn't get the details of some of the examples you were using, but I totally agree. Democracy, liberalism's other face is enslavement. Liberalism is a political, there's two forms of liberalism. One liberalism is political, organizing democracy, etc. And the other form of liberalism is economic liberalism. Now, when I talked about those two forms of violence, the surface mask, the PR representation of what West is, the sudden notion, the sudden violence, the direct visible is what democracy is. We're out to sell democracy. But then they do it by bombs, because it's about economic liberalism, free markets and owning markets. And so there's an enslavement to that. So there's a duplicity and a coercion to Western democracies. Look at the way they treat minorities. So I think that's what you were saying, and I agree that the Sikhs develop a Sat Sangat, a way of organizing that is different to that, and is different to itself, because it's an organic praxis that changes with what is required. Look at the amount of change that happened from Guru Nanak to Guru Arjan, and then from Guru Hargobind to Guru Gobind Singh, etc. The immense changes and nuance and different organizational structures that was going there. So decolonial praxis is not a system that ever, is not a way of being in the world that ever solidifies into the truth, which then you tell everybody about. It's a mode of relating. And that mode of relating allows the other person to flourish as well. That's not modernity. As we know, the divide between rich and poor is exacerbated all over the world. Now, America is turning into a third world country or having dimensions of it, right? It's been eaten itself out. There's no more other markets to expand. And hence the projection of a possible crash to the market that's coming soon, and the shift to central bank digital currencies and the whole new shift. They're going to do it again, but now digitally. I just wanted to think, just while we're on this point, I just want us to think about the construction of human knowledge. That's already an error. If it's only that, which is what modernity does, when we think of gyan, wisdom, not knowledge. Wisdom was understood in the past. Gnosis was understood as the highest value, not knowledge. We've lost knowledge. We've lost gnosis. We've lost gyan. And we've entered knowledge. Now, it's not just knowledge. We shift to machine learning and information. And not only that, to algorithmic logic and dataism. So just look at the extension of what's happening. We're increasingly leaving the body to such an extent that you have meta, the metaverse, and have an imagined body, have any kind of body you like. This is absolutely absurd. This is to totally disconnect you from the sovereignty of your body, your being, of the animal, of the saint, of the Gyani that resides within you, that needs to be contacted. And we're going towards a mode of thinking that is no longer human, it's algorithmic. So is this democracy? Shouldn't democracy be grounded in the earth, in the body, in people, in relationships with exchanges that allow flourishing of all things, not extermination of those that disagree with us, annihilation, epistemicide, until everybody's just speaking the same thing, desiring a fit body. So I think democracy as part of the structure of the sly nature of the Western narration.
Thank you. Just a small one.
Loud.
Yeah. Can you please tell me, given that there is too much information and we cannot distinguish what's right and what's wrong, figuratively, the line is completely wiped off, how to determine what's right and what's not right, and what to ponder upon? And just a small one, would you think that the ones who are right now the majority, if in case the tables are turned, would they still be advocating the democracy? Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, so I heard the first part, which was how do you determine the difference between right and wrong?
Right.
Okay, so now you might want to say that if you follow what Professor Bogle is saying, is that there's no determination of what's right and wrong, things changes. That's not actually what I'm saying. We have to make judgment. We have to decide what is right and what's wrong, but we have to do it with a wise understanding of life. When you were 2 years old, your father said to you, no, don't go there, that's fire. When you were 12 years old, your father said, hey, help me build a fire, I'll show you how to do it. So fire is definitely wrong, bad, evil, and then suddenly it becomes good, your aid. Nothing changed. But the way your body relates to it, your maturity, the maturity of your consciousness. So as your consciousness matures, you have greater nuance of understanding of what's right and wrong. If you don't have that growing, then you have black and white worlds, Republican, Democrat.
Right.
Without you seeing the oligarchs are providing the electric shocks so that we are opposing each other.
Exactly. They're 100%. That's what I sometimes want to think, but sometimes you need a validation from someone who's already a learned person. But at some point of time, I think everything is there. You just need to learn. That's what I want you to understand. Why do I have to fit in the narrative of red and the blue? Why would I have to do that? And then I seek for my own reference. And then there is something, confusion occurs, that I'm not able to find where are my references. And that's where I want to go, that I need to find my references in Sikhism, because we have had a Raj that called a Begum. Never talked about what's the philosophy of Begumpura, because we need something to associate with as a Sikh, but that is something that is completely wiped off of the history. And that's why I think that to decolonial that, I need to think in the books that says democracy is the ultimate equality, or you can say the equality of is. And that's where I really like this lecture. I really want to, because for people, because I'm really inquisitive and want to feel that I really get my answers. Otherwise, it keeps you confusing.
Yeah.
And that's why I really want to thank you
yes.
and looking forward for it. Thank you. Thank you so
Good
much.
discussion. And I think
I have a
more
question.
questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
So, okay, Professor Bhogal, my question is about desire.
Yeah.
So I believe that modernity / coloniality succeeded so well because it manipulated and controlled desire in a way that no other cultural system has done. Do you agree?
Yes.
So but the problem is modernity's claim to liberate desire. It claims to liberate desire, but all it does is something entirely different.
Say that again.
Modernity claims to liberate desire.
Mm-hmm.
But what it actually does is very different. What it actually does is, I think desire is like a river. It has a flow of energy. What modernity did was, in the name of liberating desire, it removed the banks of that river. And thus the river converted into a swamp, a stinking swamp. So modern desire, in my view, is a stinking swamp. There is no flow. So in Sikh tradition, there is a word maryada. Maryada is not discipline. Maryada is not taboo. Maryada is not juridical in nature. Maryada is something else. What Maryada does is, it enables desire to gain its flow back. It converts desire from a stinking swamp to a fresh, life-affirming river.
Yeah.
So the task of decolonization is also, and I believe fundamentally, a task of decolonizing desire. So how do you do that?
Just say that last bit again.
So the task of decolonization is tied to the task of decolonizing desire.
Yes.
How do you think?
I think one of the things that gets displaced by modernity is the notion of discipline. Another way to say what I think you said was to say that we can't just have this notion of the creation of individual freedom at the expense of others, or as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, you can do whatever you like, because that notion leads to the desire that creates a sinking swamp. You just get lost in complete idiocy, and there's no control of it. There's no discipline. Undisciplined desire is something that is about the remembering self. Oh, I want to lose weight. I want to do this. It's undisciplined. A disciplined desire is natural, starts to organize what it is. Let me rephrase this. A student came up to me and said, you can have he became a gym instructor, and he says, you can have the body that you want. You can have, emphasized abs or big biceps, or you can get the body that you want. And I was absolutely appalled by this statement, the desiring of a body, that I manufacture the shape of my body. I was appalled by this, but I couldn't figure out why until I realized that the reverse is true. The reverse is forgotten. What's the reverse? What is it what mind does my body yearn? So I wouldn't call it desire. I would call it an organic yearning in the body. And that organic yearning, i.e. the river with the base, it starts to yearn a focused, awake, listening, learning, loving mind. That's what we should be developing. Not the desire of undisciplined desire of the West, which is, oh, I'll just choose this, choose that. I'll have a body, I'll have this. I'll have a car, I'll have a mansion that will make me happy. All of it's bullshit. None of it works. It's all misplaced and it doesn't satisfy. It has no depth because it's a desire that's a fiction. It's not the yearning of your body to seek the settled mind, the beloved mind. That yearning is absolutely organic to your being, but you have to touch it. You have to contact it. You can't just invent it as a thought. And that's what the discipline is involved with.
Hanji, Balbinder Singh Bhogal.
Could you please shout?
I'll try. Can you listen to me? I have AirPods on. Okay. My question was that, like, we are talking right now about decolonial thinking or decolonial thought. So how the Sikh history or the Guru Ityas will play the role in this, will help us in countering decolonial thoughts. So this is my question there. How will the actions of Guru Sahib and the later actions of Sikhs in history will help us in the project of decolonization of the Sikh thought or Sikh praxis?
Yeah, that's a big question. And it's a great question to understand praxis. What did the Sikhs do? What is their stories? What are the events of the way the Gurus lived? Through Janam Sakhis to actual Ityas of the events that are recorded. I think there's great immense examples that we can use to understand how to decolonial praxis isn't the goal. Decolonial praxis is the way to get back to Sikhi, get back to Gur-Sikhi away from Sikhism. So decolonial practice is only relevant because of our current enmeshment, entrapment in a Western narrative. Decolonial praxis shows us that we've got stuck in that narrative. But the goal isn't decolonial praxis. But I understand the question is important, that we can have resonances between what decolonial praxis it might involve today with the resonances of what the Sikhs, how they lived and what they did. I mean, just the story with Guru Nanak being met by the village saints and the pot of milk, and how they give him a copper pot of milk full to the brim to suggest that, oh, this village is full of the purity of saints, and go find your own village to beg in. We don't need you to dilute our economy, so please go away. And Guru Nanak can spill the milk and say, you're full of, you're false gurus, you're false saints. He could drink it and say, you know, I'm the one that's pure. He can do many things, but he doesn't do that, right? He gets the jasmine flower and he has an addition. He adds to that which is already there, which is a fragrance, that there's always room for the fragrance of truth in any space. And so that's one example of wisdom, maturity, relation, how to relate to others. The other dimension is governance, and mahants, masants, Panj Pyare, you know, to Ranjit Singh's kingdom, and having Muslims in his art, etc., etc. So there's ways of relating to the other in which one can exist. Now, the great creativity of the Guru period and the stories that are attached to it we can learn a lot from in terms of that kind of wisdom of praxis of living with multiple peoples and groups and philosophies and ideologies. That would take a long time to pick out examples to show, but I think there's plenty of examples there.
Kiran, Apple Kaur, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. Can you hear me?
Nearly.
Yes,
Nearly.
yes.
Okay. Okay. Is this better?
That's a little bit better.
Okay. So I've got a question and I hope it's not off topic, but I'm going to ask and hope you can shed some light on this. So existentially just speaking, we're thrown into this world, right? And from what I understand, I know I always bring it back to an existential lens, but that's the one either conditioned myself into viewing myself, or I'm a product of the university system. But if we're gonna just for a second use the existential terms, we're all thrown into this world. And I'd like to think, based on Sikhi now, we're an extension of the divine, every single one of us. I'm still going to say we were not here, we are not here out of our own choosing. But we find ourselves in this world that is ready for us. It's made for us to live in. It just appeared just as we did, right? We didn't choose this. We didn't choose our parents. We didn't choose our religion, our family, and the list goes on. So our task is therefore to navigate the challenges that come with just being thrown into existence. There's challenges of frustration, there's suffering, demands, social conventions, duties. So what I'm trying to understand in this world that has already been defined for me and I now live in, my being, an embodied gender, for example, such as a woman, a little girl, has been defined for me. So what I should do, what I should not do, what I can do, what I can't do, just how I maneuver my body in a lot of these spaces has been told to me. Like there's a narrative, women can do this, they should not do this. And through my lived experience, I know what I can do and what I shouldn't do. So my question is how, based on the fact that, you know, my gender has been assigned to me, what I can or cannot do, I pretty much learned from my being in the world. How do I now sort of get out of this Western framework of what it means to be a woman or a girl and now shift into one in which, I mean, we come from a very rich tradition of Sikh women led the army. And I always refer to this example because I get lost in this physical sphere where I feel helpless. I feel I can't do anything. No one allows me. They'll never say you're not allowed in this space, but I know I've got to walk slowly into a space filled with men, for example, right? It won't stop me from going, but I'll go slowly into into these spaces. But how do I, or many women, reconceptualize what it means to be a woman and move away from the Western notions to a one which is more Sikhi centered? And also, do you think that perhaps some of our religious institutions are operating from perhaps a colonial mindset in which patriarchy is a dominant form of rule, and away from a Sikh-centered one in which women are at the forefront? Is that a way of excluding us without really thinking, oh, we're excluding women? I can speak from experience. So many times I go to the Gurdwara and I just don't see myself on the wall. But I don't think there is any shortage of women who have sacrificed themselves as shaheeds to be on that wall, whether it be like a physical sacrifice of like literally being shot by an officer, or the sacrifice that so many of these women have given up, such as their children, or seeing their sons go just missing. Those are all sacrifices, but they're not seen. So my question is how do I change the way I view myself from one in which my gender has been defined in a Western lens to one where I can redefine myself through a Sikhi lens? And do these institutions also suffer from, perhaps without knowing, that they have fallen into a colonial patriarchal way of existing that isn't one in which is rooted in Sikhi? I hope my question wasn't too long.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, so this is needs to be handled with a certain amount of sensitivity, because the ground in which we live in is moving, is changing. But there's some very clear signs here. First of all, the issue that is there patriarchy within heterosexual cis patriarchy culture within the Sikhism, and what is the issue there? So you could easily say yes. You could easily say yes to your sense of being alienated from various spaces within the Gurdwara, whether it's the langar and the pictures on the wall, etc. You could easily say yes, but there's a great danger in simply saying yes, because what that happens is that you're employing anachronistic thinking, because what you're doing is, like you yourself highlighted, is that you're using an alien narrative, an alien structure, to look to the Sikh tradition and say, oh, look, this is happening. There's, gender bias within the Sikh tradition. But then if you look at the Sikh tradition, what are its own self-namings? What are its own ways of understanding? And gender doesn't feature in it, just like the hijras don't feature in as a major category to organize life. What are the categories that to organize life? And this is to answer your second question, and that is Manmukh and Gurmukh. Now, they aren't gendered. Anybody can be, everybody is a Manmukh, and very few attain the level of a Gurmukh. So this is the focus. So it's allowing men and women and everybody in between to engage in a process in which the journey isn't equality of the genders. The journey is a transformation of self. Now, along the way, the gender discourse, it touches and overlaps. There's some relationship there, like you yourself acknowledged in terms of empowering images of Sikh women in Sikh history, leading armies, etc. And that, but the way you hold on to that is not to, in the sense, to say, oh, well, okay, we should fight for women's rights. This is alien, because women's aren't alienated to begin with. And that you could say, because of the transformation of Sikhs living within Sikhism and living in the modern world, that we've already got a kind of patriarchy operating. But in the Gur-Sikh tradition, in the way that is lived by the gurus, there isn't necessarily, there isn't a gender discourse, right? So I think there's a human discourse of acknowledging everybody has the same journey, and that it's incumbent upon all genders, all beings, to take that journey. And it's the delineation of that is important, that takes precedence. And what goes along with that in terms of structuring a family, the way of governance and organizing, the question never leaves the discipline of that project. So, you could say LGBTQ, and how many more letters do we want to add? This is just the remembering self, choosing another letter, another fiction, another name, not necessarily fiction, but trying to get more accurate when actually the journey is to go to meet the body. So it's not, we don't get accuracy by saying LGBTQIAA and whatever. What we get, that's almost like a misunderstanding of the being thrown into this existence and what is the existence, what does it involve? Existentially, we are given the task that once we've entered language, can we leave it? Once we've entered culture, can we leave it? And have this creative tension between allegory and satire, between philosophy and poetry, between Gurmukh Vedan and Gurmukh Nadan. How this can, this is the project, right? So what, so I'm not fully answering your question, but I'm laying the groundwork in which an answer could arise. Because I think what you might want to hear is something I don't want to say, which is, you know, yes, there's, you know, a problem with the way women are treated in Sikhism. This falls straight into the narrative of the aberrant native, the savage. You know, they're not as civilized as we are. And that's not actually what's happening. It's much more subtle. The value of people who have great privilege and power naming us, do the way they name indigenous Indian traditions, native traditions, or any traditions, the minorities, the way power, great majority power often names that, should we just exist in their vocabulary? My whole paper lecture has been arguing to shift, take a sidestep away from that, right? We need to create not more accurate representations and correct mischaracterizations, misrepresentations. We need to have a form of encounter and engagement in which a new being arises that isn't necessarily a woman or a man. So I think that's the best I can do at the moment.
Thank you, Professor Bhogal. It was
I can't hear
excellent
you.
reply. But this issue needs further exploration. So at the Vancouver Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies, we will try to continue this discussion as well. So we will invite other speakers, particularly Sikh women, and we will continue this conversation as well. Yeah. So any other questions?
Satbir Singh.
Satbir Singh.
Thank you, Professor Bhogal. I'll try to speak at an adequate volume. Can you hear?
Nearly.
All right. So lots of different questions that are coming up in response to the dialogue. I guess one of them, following up on what has been said, why is it problematic, or why for someone occupying a sort of Sikh subjectivity, right? What is the problem if I were to sort of try to articulate and play out the politics within a sort of Western capitalist, the options, sort of the modern swamp that Pluralism Singh mentioned, right? Why not? There are so many options available. There's sort of an active discourse. There's a sort of monetized future for me in that. What is it that may be problematic, or why should I maybe be concerned about that? I guess maybe this is a question coming up for me, whether I sort of occupy my position as a sort of in an academic sphere, or maybe as a you know, as a woman, or whatever, whatnot, right? This is kind of what's coming up for me.
I'm not sure I got the question. I'm just really struggling to hear. I'm really sorry about this. You were saying something to do with a certain limitation that I might be putting on to something, and you say, why not engage with politics or modern arguments? Is that what you said?
A little bit. What I'm wondering is, Pluralism Singh had said that capitalism and coloniality, it directs desire in a way that appears liberating, but I guess the satirical phrase was modern swamp, right? And so it seems that there's a lot of options available, and I will also be heard, right? I'll also potentially be incentivized financially, right? And also sort of in social media, I'll get a lot of attention, right? If I articulate my Sikh subjectivity into sort of the channels that are out there, right? But maybe why would that be concerning from a decolonial from a decolonial?
Oh, I think I get it. So why not take advantage of the various means of communication that are in play? Twitter, Facebook. Why not engage in discourses? And I'm not suggesting to be a hermit. I'm not suggesting to withdraw from life. I'm not suggesting that we should somehow seek purity in the disengagement with all these modern discourses. I'm not doing that. I said we have to have a focus on the building of various structures in which our narration can be heard. We're not heard, that's why. You carry on Twitter, you do this, do that, you don't have the knowledge of a decolonial critique or some kind of understanding of how the debate shapes you, then you're just going to be an effect of that debate, which is already predicted. So, like individualism, the notion of individualism. What's wrong with individualism? That's wonderful. Let's all be individuals. Well, what's wrong with individualism is the structure of the subjectivity that arises, that is me, me, me. This is fundamentally the problem of religious traditions. So it's a critical engagement with narrative that does not seek its admiration, does not seek its affirmation, but it seeks to disrupt it, because we want to be whole. We don't want to just be mind meats of secular Christians. Modernity, one thing I didn't explain is the double position that Christianity has in modernity. Portuguese, the French, the Spanish, the British, the Dutch, etc., they were all white Christians, and how coloniality operated through a religious discourse that became secular. So secularity isn't immediately separable from a religious worldview, and that secular Christian worldview has become the one in which all of us have to operate to gain a certain kind of civility and acknowledgement of being human. That's not right. We need to be different to that notion of a human, to show how all the variety of languages and cultures and different expressions of human beings can flourish again, rather than be annihilated by master languages and master processes. So we're talking about the slow violence, incremental violence, the invisible violence of mutating into these forms without knowing. That's what the lecture is about. So I'm not saying to be perpetually suspicious. I'm saying have a discipline which allows us to start to notice things. And when we notice, we say, oh, I'm silenced in this context. How can I get to speak? Not I of the individualism, I of the Sangat, I of the Panth, right? And I think that was another issue I wanted to talk to Kiran about, was the shift from the individual to the Sangat and the Panth and what that means. So there's things to be developed there. I really don't know if I really captured your question.
Can I say something? Can I add something?
Loudly.
Okay. So first of all, one misunderstanding about desire is that many people assume that it is individually regulated. Desire is never individually regulated. It is always socially regulated, because desire always involves another person. That's why it's always socially regulated. It's not about your individuality, what you desire. It lies outside you. And that's where everything comes in. All of society, all of the mechanisms of slow violence that Professor Bhogal has talked about. What I want to say is, Eric Fromm wrote a book, The Sane Society. And the first sentence of that book is, can a society be insane? Can a society be diseased? Of course, yes. We live in a society that is problematic in so many ways. And one of the most problematic ways is that it has harnessed, manipulated, controlled desire in commercial ways that tries to create a frictionless life. The problem with the frictionlessness is that the flow of life always requires friction. It always requires conflict. There is no life without conflict. The situation that you are describing, that I have choices, I have everything, I have everything is coming in and so on and so forth. The only problem with that form of life is that it stinks. So, and everything else doesn't matter. If we have to live with a constant stink, nothing matters. Doesn't matter if you live in a palace. Doesn't matter what you have. So that's my point. That it is socially regulated. We have to factor in that everything else is involved in what I desire and how I go after my desire. What I desire and what I not desire. For example, Professor Bhogal's talk is about what is usually called in critical theory the rearrangement of desire. Gur-Sikhi Marg is fundamentally, what is it? It is a rearrangement of desire, nothing else. So in contemporary society, that kind of rearrangement of desire is ridiculed. It is made impossible. It is sabotaged in so many ways, sneaky ways mostly. So that's the problem, I think. But we will organize an event called the Politics of Desire. And then we will continue this conversation. Now, I think Harjot has a question. Harjot.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Professor Kaur, can you hear him?
Who's speaking?
Harjot.
Harjot. Can you hear
I
me?
can hear, maybe it's on a different screen.
Yeah, so I think when you were talking about the idea of counterpublics, this might be an idea I think that's been fleshed out by, I believe, Professor Warner.
Yeah.
As these publics being queer creatures, you can't point to them or count them or look them in the eye. What sort of counterpublics, other than the Darbar itself, do we participate in, and what sort of potential is there to enter these spaces? Can you speak a little bit more about maybe a critique of what Warner has said about counterpublics and what your conception of counterpublic is in this, in respect with your paragraph on that?
Yeah, so a counterpublic can't just be at the remembering self, just another narrative that tries to challenge. I've been constantly trying to say that the words that come from connecting mind with body, the words that come from that kind of contacting the silence of the animal and the mystic, those words have kind of extra insight into the entrapments that we get involved in. So it's not just, a counterpublic isn't just, oh, let's just think and just make another counter-public. So therefore, the Sikh counter-public of the Guru Granth Sahib is really significant, because it's not a collection of people who just make thinking and just have, oh, let's just think about this and how to challenge this. They've all done that journey to experience Anand. And that counter-public, the Sat Sangat, is a revolutionary idea that hasn't been ever seen anywhere. Like, we have a community of saints, a community of the true. Let's just ponder this a little bit. Alfonso Linguist, interesting philosopher, said that he wants to have a community in which nobody has anything in common. Which is really interesting. You know, we usually have a notion of community of, okay, same language, same ethnicities, we have all kinds of notion of community, but it's always shared notions. And he says, what would it be like to have a community where you have nothing in common? What else would the Sat Sangat be? The only criteria is a community of the true. And truth isn't monopolized by any group, any tradition, any gender, any race. So therefore, what would it be to have actually a Sat Sangat, a Sad Sangat? So this is really important, that was the model. So in order to understand what the difference between a counter-public would be, I need to set up the difference between a competitive memory and a multidirectional memory, because it's out of the multidirectional memory that you get a notion of a counter-public that I mean, not what the guy that you cited and the issue that you might have with him. I don't know his work, actually. Was it Warner, I think you said. So let me just, if you like, if you have the patience to listen to me, can I just elaborate the difference between competitive memory and multidirectional memory?
Yes,
So
of course.
Memories
Yes.
So memories are colonized by the nation so that they're nationalized. So what you think is your personal memory is actually a national memory. The nation is forming your memory. Various politics is forming your notion of gender. Various politics forming your notion of race. Various politics is forming your notion of American, right? Now, the way the narrative works, if we follow the divided rule, is that it's friend enemy, it's always oppositional, self versus other, rather than self as other. If it's always self versus other, then memory is competitive. So the way the Palestinians narrate what's happening to them is one version, and the way the Israelis narrate what's happening to them is another version, and they absolutely, it's a zero-sum game. They totally, they don't overlap at all. So here we have a split. We have Republicans and Democrats currently. We have this kind of polarization. Memories become competitive. Now, is this normal? Don't we always compete? Aren't the French and the Germans always at odds and the British always at odds? Isn't this normal? Isn't this human? The Sikhs and the Hindus and the Muslims, isn't competitive memory universal? Isn't that universal? No. And there are examples of a different model of understanding memory, and that is having multiple directions to your memory that Michael Rothberg argues for in his book. And that multidirectional memory, what does that mean? That means that the house of truth has multiple rooms, that self-other relations are absolutely necessary, that truth is a resonance that arises across groups, across individuals, not a property of any individual. And it's the way you relate. We're relational beings. Remember I said, what's the difference between starting off with being as opposed to being with? If we start off with being with, then obviously truth is relational and is a resonance across various groups. So can you have a memory in which it's not a zero-sum game? It's men or women. it's Muslim or Hindu. That's the absolute expression of the modern narrative, divide and conquer, master, slave, right? The opposite, or an alternative model, would be somebody whose heart is big enough and his mind is wise enough to house multiple stories, multiple narratives, multiple relations. So a counter-public that is formed from those that can engage in a multi-directional memory is somebody like Guru Nanak, and how he unites sannyasis with grihast, how he starts to unite polarized communities together and brings the resonance of their experience, their bodily experience, in the Guru Granth Sahib. So Sheikh Farid is there with Namdev, and Sheikh Bikhan is there, right, with Kabir, and with the gurus. These are all individuals that form the Guru Granth Sahib is a political text. It's not just a mystical text, it's a political text, and the politics is in the formation of who gets to enunciate truth, not just a singular group. So this is a radically different model, where you have an illumination of a satsangat, and how there's no right and wrong. You know, an unripe apple isn't wrong, it's unripe. That unripeness isn't evil forever and damned to eternity in hell. It can become ripe. Sachi bani, kachi bani is on a sliding scale. And so this notion of all human beings have to connect Gur Shabbat. And in their different ways, God is different to himself. That those people that contact Shabbat, the word, will do it differently. And so Ek Anek is inherently diverse. Heterogeneity is natural, is organic. Homogeneous cultures are the problem. That's the Western narrative. So I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but a counter-public that is formed by those that can have multi-directional memories that are based on a resonance of the experience of Gur Shabbat is something that I think you see in the Sikh tradition.
This was a wonderful session. I think we should conclude it. Anybody has any final question, comment? Okay.
I have one request.
Okay.
I wasn't able to read any of the chat because I was trying so hard to listen. So if somebody could copy that and send it to me, and then I can get a sense of what the response was, because I've had
I will do that.
It's been frustrating because I can't hear that properly.
Praneet, we have Praneet with us. Praneet, would you like to say something?
Anji, can you hear me? Is my voice audible?
We can.
I have the boring administrative questions, which is, is there any policy around lecture notes? Are there recommended readings associated with this lecture? And just taking that forward, so many things that you said, Dr. Bhogal, resonate so much with the majority of us. For me, your point about indigeneity in particular stood out. And just again, rather than discuss that, I would again just request for some more readings around the notion of indigeneity, because I studied that in an American university, and the binary between indigenous and settler is very strong and very securely established. But when we do look at South Asia or other parts of the world which are geographically connected landmasses, this understanding becomes much more complicated. And ultimately, just based on my understanding of how indigeneity is in vogue in the current in social media spaces in America, I also see that it's becoming it's coming up a lot in the context of South Asia as well. And different ethnicities have different contesting arguments under the ambit of indigeneity. So once again, I would just like to request for some more resources and just whatever else you'd like to share on this. But thank you so much. And it was so wonderful to see you again and to see everyone again. Trumpy as I am, I have missed everyone. Thank you to Paji Prabshar and Biren Prabshar and Deep for reaching out to me. I was being very antisocial, so I do appreciate all the efforts that you all have made and that you all keep making. And thank you all very much. I will stop talking now.
It's
Nice
great
see you
to
as well,
see you
Praneeth.
again, Praneeth.
Thanks for coming.
So just quickly on indigeneity, I can't resist. I'm sorry to keep you here. We've been here a long time. But it's like how blacks have become fetishized as a sort of truth value, and indigeneity become fetishized as a truth value. And no one group has the truth. We have to work harder. But in terms of lecture notes, and I can give these lecture notes to the group. I can basically what I was trying to do was just corral segments from various papers I've given. So I can give you the links to the papers that I got the sections from.
Thank you, Praneeth, for suggesting that during upcoming lectures, we will share suggested readings list. So we will try to do that. So maybe that will be helpful. And Professor Bhogal has an academia page and all his papers are there. So if you want to read more of his work, you can visit his academia page, academia.edu. Okay, then Prabshar and Deep.
Professor Bhogal, would you, before we conclude, would you like to say a few things about the Vancouver Institute for Interdisciplinary Studies?
Would I like to say anything about Sikh
About the
Studies?
institute, Vancouver Institute?
Oh, yeah. One of the most important things that makes the Vancouver Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies unique is that the people who are leading it, because they have had an experience of life which directly, their existential experience of life directly translates into their intellectual projects. This is very rare. It's not a career for them. It's not a philosophical system that they are proud to have knowledge about and they want to communicate to others. It's a desperate cry for justice. Those institutions that are built upon people with hearts is an institution worth listening to, especially if they have expertise, organic expertise within the tradition that they speak of, and how it relates to the present in terms of multiple political projects that they've both been engaged with constantly with the Sikh Sangat and the Panth, but also because they have both taken time out of their lives with a full critique of academia. I like this about them. They made me see how, I mean, I was critical about academia, but both of them saw the great need for it and the necessity to expand one's minds through multiple disciplines and gain PhDs in academia to be able to speak knowledgeably about it. So I cannot say enough about the Vancouver Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies because of this. The orientation, the types of reflections that you will get are not what you will find elsewhere in other academic spaces. It's academia plus. It's not just academic stuff. You get the credits, you get learning in this course, but you get to know what it means to be a human being. You get to explore yourself as a person who lives in a body that is being suppressed today in various ways, if not mutilated, brutalized, and killed. So therefore, there's a certain resonance of a tone that is lacking in a department of philosophy.
Thank you so much, Professor Bhogal, for agreeing to give this talk at such a short notice. And so many old friends have joined us, and I saw in the audience Tavleen and Jasleen. We wanted to hear from them as well. In future, we are going to organize more talks on all issues, gender issues and decolonial issues. And Professor Arvind Singh Mandir has already agreed to give a talk, and we'll have a session with him soon. And we, both Prabh Sharanpir and I myself, we have been teaching in different university for a while. And I had the opportunity to design my own courses when I taught at Berkeley. At University of London, I didn't have that. Prabh Sharanpir also designed many of his own courses, but there were many constraints while working in an established university. So we had always felt this need to have a platform, to have an institute of our own, where we can design the course and we can teach in a little unconventional way. So it's like we are going to try to make these courses more engaging and more interactive in future as well. My experience of teaching such courses at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, for 8 years has taught me that questions never interrupt the flow of a talk. They always add intensity, intellect, clarity to it. So I always announced at the beginning of every talk I gave, every session, that interrupt me. Do not be quick. Take your time, elaborate your questions, and make a comment if you do not have a question. Share a disagreement. So we're going to hold this session, these sessions, the classes we have, in this manner where we try to clarify the themes or the existential concerns the students who would be joining us or the peers who would be joining us in these talks. And the courses, the first three courses we have introduced. First is understanding modernity. Prabh Sharanpir Singh is going to teach it. And other two are introduction to Sikhi and religion and culture, the Sikh experience. I will be teaching those courses, and Prabh Sharanpir Singh's course is going to begin on June 16th. My courses will start on June 15th, both of them. And we have some enrollments. So we hope to have more enrollments in the coming days, but we will not have any enrollments after the 15th. 15th is the deadline to enroll, July, 15th of July. Did I say June? Okay, so sorry about that. After the deadline, we will not accept any enrollments because the first introductory lectures, they are going to frame the entire theme of the course, give you the background. And for every course, every lecture, this is going to be a 12-hour course. Each course is going to be a 12-week course. And each session is going to be 3 hours. And for each lecture, we are going to provide you PDF files of the required actually readings for the course. And we are going to expect the students to read those articles or book chapters before the lecture, because the academic journal articles or book chapters we're going to share with all of you who are going to enroll for the courses. Some of them might not be very accessible for you. Those of you who do not have background in philosophy or critical theory. So in class, we're going to break down the readings for each week. Also, the readings we have recommended for these courses, they do not represent any singular perspective. They are going to be different perspectives of different scholars. And we disagree with most of the scholars whose writings we are going to share with you. So we are going to offer a critique of the readings we're going to share with you. We are going to have a critical analysis, a discussion on those perspectives. Like, I really want to talk about Harjot Oberai's perspective, Anshu Malhotra, Anne Murphy, Farina Mir, Ishwar Dayal Gaur, Sumail Singh Sidhu. I strongly disagree with all of them. And there are other scholars with whom we agree at some points, disagree with other points, disagree at other points. So readings are must. Otherwise, if you do not have the context of the discussion, what we are commenting upon, what we are talking about, or what we are deconstructing in the classroom, then it might not be easy to follow the lectures in the classroom. So we appreciate one more time that Professor Bhogal accepted our request to give this inaugural lecture at a very short notice. And I am totally aware how busy Professor Bhogal is. He has to finish like 4 journal articles he's working on right now. And we appreciate all of you who have joined us in the discussion. Today, the first Zoom link we had shared with you publicly, it was hacked by someone and they had posted some very objectionable stuff on it. And we apologize for that. We're going to email Zoom as well and request them if they can provide more security in future. So we will try to keep these discussions in a closed circle. We do not plan to share these sessions on social media. And I think numbers wise, we had maximum 68, 69 people who had joined. We still have 52 people with us. And I think that is actually a lot more than we need for any meaningful discussion. So in future, if any of you or your friends would like to be part of these lectures, then we request you to go to vancouverinstitute.net and please subscribe or have your friends subscribe who are interested in joining the future talks. So we want to keep it within this circle of people who are into philosophy, critical theory, or who are looking for some in-depth analysis. And there is a risk of being hacked if we make the links public. But I think it's better to build a Sangat that is interacting with each other for a continuous and prolonged period of time. So we had some friends from our academic conferences we had at UC Berkeley from 2007 and 8. Some we had at University of Michigan, some we had at Hofstra University, and we had many friends from our Goshti Zoom sessions that we had during the early phase of the COVID pandemic. So it's so nice to reconnect with all of you again. And we want to stay connected, and we want to continue these discussions. And I appreciate all of you for joining us. Thank you so much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you, everyone.
Prabh Sharanbir Singh, would you like to say a few words?
No, I'm okay. So thank you, Professor Bhogal. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time. Have a good day.